And I think we'll make a start. So welcome everybody. Many businesses do AI in some form or another. There are various co-pilots, as we know, within desktop applications or LLM tools like Claude, ChatGPT and similar. And they're being increasingly used alongside more traditional office suites, things like Word, Excel and so forth. So that's becoming quite common. Yet brilliant though those tools may be, and great though great it is though that people are using them, it doesn't really begin to scratch the surface of what's possible, does it? So many business leaders believe that AI in various forms has the potential to revolutionize the customer experience, shorten cycle times, eliminate waste, and provide breathtakingly fast retrieval and analytics across huge volumes of data using natural language. Also, in these challenging economic times, many people are seeing it as a substitute for people, and we'll discuss that a bit later. I think it's also fair to say that there are many examples of where these new technologies have exactly the opposite effect to the one that was intended. One of my pet hates is chatbots, for instance. How many of those, in your experience, make dealing with a business easier than if you could just speak to a human in the first place? It feels a bit like many of us have got our noses pressed up against the window of all this power and potential, but somehow we can't figure out how and where to start. And when we do, things often don't work out the way we want them to. I'm here today with two good friends of mine, Tim Connolly and Andy Phillips, to see if we can suggest some answers, or at the very least, a way of approaching the challenge. So let's begin with why we decided to call this webinar 360 Degrees of Success. And I need to find where the share button is because it's gone. Excuse me. There we are. Boom. So, our view is that harnessing the power of AI isn't just about AI. It's actually about the interplay between business strategy, data strategy, process reimagination and reengineering, and of course, the potential of AI and automation itself. And we believe that each of those has to be addressed if a business is to identify and exploit the most valuable AI and automation opportunities. We will discuss each one in turn, but let's start by considering them holistically. Tim, why don't you give us your views on the interplay between these various elements?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. There's always a lot of talk about the strategy gap, how difficult it can be to convert strategy into action. And in my mind, it's the interplay between these four elements that actually enables us to close that gap. So what does the strategy demand that we do? What processes do we need to be operating to deliver this? And how do we optimize those processes? And then what's the symbiotic relationship between processes and data? So what data do we need to operate each process? And what does our process model make it possible to do with the data? And then really AI and automation touch every one of the other components in this diagram, not just as a means of delivering the strategy, but making new strategic objectives possible. And then, of course, that impacts both process and data. And then on top of that, obviously, both automation and AI depend on having accurate processes and data, which is something we'll discuss later.
Oh, great. Thanks, Tim. Very, very clearly put. Andy, as a data and analytics expert, you're always seeking to improve business performance. I know that. So how do you see the importance of bringing these various elements together?
Thanks, Brian. So for me, bringing strategy, data, processes, and AI together, it's not really optional. It's fundamental. When these elements are treated in isolation, organizations often create silos that undermine performance rather than enhance it. So I tend to think of it like running a well-organized kitchen. So strategy is the menu, a clear articulation of where you're trying to deliver and why customers should choose you. Data is the ingredients, the quality, consistency, and availability directly affect the outcome. Processes. So these are the recipes and workflows, ensuring work is executed reliably and at scale. And AI is the modern equipment. So it's not just a replacement for skill or planning, but a powerful accelerator when everything else is in place. So when these components are aligned, the operation runs smoothly, output quality improves, and AI becomes a genuine enabler of performance rather than a distraction. If any one of these building blocks are missing, things quickly start to fall apart. You can buy the best kit money can buy, but if the ingredients are scattered and inconsistent, the results will be disappointing. And even when the insights are good, without clear processes, it's like having a great dish ready in the kitchen and no way to get it to the customer. So I think the real breakthrough happens when those elements reinforce each other. That's why you begin to see a genuine shift in the culture. Confidence grows, adoption increases, and teams start to recognize that these capabilities are simplifying their work and supporting better decisions, rather than feeling like a yet another system they need to learn and work around. So ultimately, that harmony is how businesses go from AI POC to embedding it as a capability that drives growth, experience, and innovation.
What a fantastic analogy. I love the kitchen analogy. That's brilliant. Just to let everybody know, we are recording this, so you'll be able to, if you missed any of it, you'll be able to get it on our website in the next day or two. Tim, in my introduction, I mentioned that many business leaders are looking to AI to replace people. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's the wrong place to start, Brian. I mean, ever since mechanization of work began, the respective roles of humans and machines have been in kind of constant flux. And really, I think essentially there are two things going on. The first is technology obviously does replace humans in the performance of certain tasks, even whole processes. And that leaves humans to do the things that they can still do better than the machines. And, that includes a lot of manual tasks, but critically for our conversation, it also includes all those cognitively complex tasks that we hear talked about so much. But the second thing is that machines do much more than this. They make this, I think it's going to be a big theme in our conversation. They make activities and processes possible and even outcomes that literally weren't possible before, even unimaginable. And because they do this, they also make new human roles possible. And again, this isn't new. This has been happening throughout industrial history. You didn't have train drivers before there were trains. And today the equivalent is we'll talk about data scientists and cybersecurity experts and social media influencers, to name a few. There's a long, long list of roles that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. But in all these cases, it's about what is uniquely human. And that definition, what is uniquely human, is constantly changing with what the technology enables. Will the net impact be fewer or more jobs? I haven't a clue, Brian, honestly. And in all honesty, I don't think anybody else has either. It's not a mathematical formula. It's to do with how we humans react to the threats and the opportunities before us.
I think it's really well put, and I couldn't agree more, by the way, Tim. So let's talk about these various building blocks. Let's start, of course, with business strategy itself. Business strategy is always the first place to start. What's our ambition? What sets us apart? Why do customers buy from us today? How do we win? Why do we lose? Where's the friction in our operating models? Where do we want to be better and faster? And in this particular context, it's really important to ask the question, why do we think AI and/or automation will help us? I'd go as far as to say that unless we approach AI in the context of our business strategy and are very clear about what we want to achieve and why, then our likelihood of failure is very high, as both Andy and Tim put it when they were commenting on the model overall earlier. I guess it's about clarity. Without it, we're kind of floundering, tilting at windmills. And as you said earlier, Tim, obviously there are times when new innovation itself creates an impact all on its own that we have to consider when we're reconsidering our business strategy, if you get what I mean. So, examples from the past might be iTunes on the music business. I was involved some years ago helping EMI with their digital supply chain as a result of the launch of iTunes. And we all know that the traditional record business as it was then was completely disrupted by this new platform. Tablets and smartphones have had that kind of impact on just about everything. And every business leader is always thinking about, well, how do I make use of these new technologies in order to be better, bigger, faster? Fast broadband. We can't do anything these days, it seems to me, without fast broadband. And of course, recently, again, building on both of your earlier points, large language models like ChatGPT, we're all excited by them because we can see that they are changing the way we work as individuals and the way in which even we conduct our personal lives in some cases. But actually, what is the impact going to be on strategy? So in terms of AI and automation itself, any huge innovation should cause us to revisit our strategy and reevaluate. Does it change our aspirations? Maybe. Does it change where we'll play or how we'll win? Does it impact on the capabilities we thought we needed and perhaps no longer need? Or are there some new ones that we need that we didn't have or don't have today? Does it impact on how we operate? All of these are business strategy questions. They're not about chasing shiny applications. They are about business decisions. So, Andy, let's say we're clear about what we want to achieve. What would we need to do from a data perspective?
So, once the business ambition and strategy is clear, Brian, the data work becomes much more purposeful. Instead of trying to fix all the data, we need to zero in on the data that directly underpins the strategic goals. From my perspective, I'd say that there are 4 critical activities. So firstly, establish trust in core data. It's not about perfection. Perfection's an expensive hobby. It's about reliability. So people need to trust that the numbers won't change depending on who runs the report, trust that the definitions are consistent, and trust that the insights aren't a creative writing exercise.
Yes.
So when trust rises, adoption follows. When trust isn't there, people quietly revert to the spreadsheet under their desk like it's a security blanket.
Yep.
The next, I'd govern what matters most. Good governance isn't bureaucracy. It's the operating system for your data. Clear ownership, definitions, lineage, these things remove internal friction because nothing kills momentum faster than 4 teams arguing about whose number's right. I'd modernize the data architecture and pipelines. And to leverage AI at scale, you need pipes that don't leak, clog, or require manual intervention. And this is where data engineering comes in, building pipelines that are resilient, automated, and scalable. I think about it as a well-engineered plumbing system, won't clog or break. And lastly, making data accessible and usable. Using data shouldn't feel like decoding ancient hieroglyphics, I think. Self-service, good UX, clear visualizations all matter. The more people actually use the data, the more the business accelerates. And when we get these elements right, the organization becomes AI ready long before the first model's even built. Data is invariably disparate. We talk about this all the time. Understanding your data and making your data accessible is paramount because ultimately data democratization enables AI and the strategy.
Right. So just run over the 4 things just in turn again for us. First one was trust in data, wasn't it?
Trust in data. So secondly, govern what matters most.
Yeah.
Thirdly, modernize the data architecture and pipelines.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's the
lastly,
engineering bit. Yeah.
Data engineering, and lastly, making it accessible and usable.
Right. All of that makes great sense. So thanks, Andy. So Tim, I hesitate to say this, but talking about business processes tends to make 1 or 2 folk eyes glaze over. And I absolutely am not one of those, as you know. But you've got to admit, at first glance, talking about process in the context of the brilliance of AI, which can be quite dazzling, it could come across as a bit boring. Why is that perception wrong?
You sound a bit like Nick Robinson on the Today program on Radio 4 when he says some people might suggest, not me, obviously. I'm sure you wouldn't suggest that for a minute, Brian. But look, in any field, brilliance usually relies on some boring stuff going on somewhere. That's not necessarily mean that I think the processes are boring, but they're a key bit of hard work that needs to be done. I'd turn it around. AI can do brilliant things when it works, and when it doesn't, it's often because the hard work of understanding and rationalizing the process environment and getting the data right in the way that Andy's described is because those things haven't been done. And, like a lot of boring stuff, I think the best way to find out how important it is for something at the dazzling end of the spectrum to go wrong. If you point AI at an organization and tell it to come up with better ways of operating, which is an obvious application for it and a potentially really powerful one. But if that information about processes and data is inaccurate or lacking in any way, it'll be absolutely disastrous. And, over the length of my career, we talked about garbage in, garbage out. And it's a phrase that's getting a whole new lease of life for me in the work days of AI, because we could have garbage in, garbage out on an epic scale if we get this wrong. So that's why I think it's so important.
Yeah, that
and not at all boring.
No, not at all boring. Absolutely. Now, I'm going to stop sharing the diagram now for a little while, but we'll pop it up again at the end. So how do we start? Now, as I want to pick up on some of the points that have been made earlier. As many of the people who are joining us today know, I have the privilege of spending quite a lot of time with the data and AI community. And I've had the privilege actually of chairing dozens of chief data officers exchanges where business leaders and the great and the good from the technology community exchange experiences, insights, ideas, etc. Now, one of the things that I've observed is that success is most likely when an initiative is what you might call narrow and deep, tightly focused, picking up on Andy's point about focusing on the data, governing the data that matters. Tightly focused to address a particular strategic business requirement with the data carefully governed and managed. The process is well understood and clearly documented, and the outcome measured. So as a starting point, when I listen to stories of the various journeys of the enterprises and public sector organizations that are represented at events like that, that's one of the things that seems to characterize success. It's tight focus, narrow, deep. Not only does that deliver rapid value, but it also builds confidence throughout the organization, back to your trust point, Andy, that this is worth doing. So I think that's the first point in making a sensible start. Don't try and do everything all at once. And then be clear about why. Take a breath, consider your business strategy. Do you need to reset it? What's your hypothesis about how AI and automation can help? Is it related to your interaction with your customers? If so, in what way? And by the way, that's the highest stakes area you've got to deal with, by the way. Anything that interacts with your customers, you have to be absolutely perfect on. Is it about other parts of the business model, such as individual functions or processes? Where is the friction that slows you down? Where is the missing capability that's holding you back? Then you can start focusing. And as guys, as you know, we between us have helped multiple businesses set and reset their strategies so they have real clarity about what they're trying to achieve. And it really doesn't take long. So back to how do you get started? Most business leaders already know what they want to achieve. They just don't always know the best way to structure it or communicate it in a way that makes sense to their people or their customers. And then it's about data and processes. And most organizations have data all over the place. Again, another point you made, Andy, data islands and data conflicts abound. I was only hearing this morning about the Japanese subsidiary of a large organization who I have the privilege of working with. And they were saying that I was told that people were rekeying manually data from one system to another just to try and keep all of the systems in sync with each other. There wasn't any automation to do that for them, which seemed very well, it seemed like an opportunity, and I know it's something that they're going to be addressing. But that's true of all of us, even if it's just taking a piece of information from a business application and sticking it into Excel, for example. So data islands and data conflicts are everywhere, especially if they've grown, if the company is concerned of growing by acquisition or by merger. And what happens is, back to the human bit, Tim, us enterprising humans end up manually managing it as best we can. Our staff end up on swivel chairs entering data in different systems, just as I've said, or loading up Excel as a kind of business Esperanto. That, to me, seems like a million miles from the idealized world of AI and automation. Andy, you're used to fixing that kind of mess. How do you go about it?
Yeah, Brian, as you know, I've probably seen every flavor of data chaos you can imagine, right? From spreadsheets that should qualify as small countries to business rules written in someone's head, and systems that haven't spoken to each other since the early 2000s. So the good news, there's always a way through, and it's almost never as scary as it looks. There are a few steps to achieve this. So firstly, I'd understand the ecosystem. So we look to map the landscape, where the data lives, how it flows, who touches it, and where it gets blocked. Next, prioritize ruthlessly. Not all data is strategically important. Sometimes 80% of the business pain comes from 20% of the data.
Mm-hmm.
So we zoom in on the data sets that power the most critical decisions, customer journeys, or revenue streams. Next, I'd fix with a value first mindset, I think. So we don't bury the organization in a 2-year data transformation. You need to
Right.
fix the high value pieces first, creating visible wins, and then scale outwards. But then it's about enduring capability. So putting governance, automation, and ownership in place so problems stay solved. A lot of organizations confuse cleaning the data with fixing data systems, and we always focus on both.
Right. Right. And again, the way you described it, it's kind of manageable chunks, isn't it?
Well, it has to be, because we don't always have all the resource we need or all the time that we want.
Yeah, got it. Make it. Tim, why don't you comment on that, breaking things into manageable chunks?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real opportunity to do things differently by doing exactly that, by breaking things into manageable chunks. I think the key point is that each chunk, each stage delivers an outcome. And not just that it's an outcome, but it's one that's actually taking us on to the next stage of the project. You know, quick wins are fine, but not if they tend to result in long-term defeats. They've got to be taking us in the right direction. And, you know, both of you have talked about going narrow and deep. And when you start in that way, I think one of the key things that you need to be asking from the outset is, what platform is the outcome going to give us to move on to the next stage? And the analogy I sometimes use is, if you imagine a huge muddy field, and I mean really huge, as you'll see, miles and miles across, and you can't get across it, you can't navigate it without getting bogged down. So you construct a gravel path so you can walk across it. And the gravel path, that gives you a benefit in its own right, but it's also setting the foundation for the next phase, which is that you build a tarmac road, and then you can drive across it, and then you can get across the field quicker. And then the tarmac road, because it's a really big field, you know, is the foundation for building an 8-lane highway. And, you know, you could extend the analogy to enabling self-driving cars or flying cars or whatever. But the point is that at each stage, you haven't just built something that's useful, you've also created the foundation for the next stage. And I think everything we're talking around here, working on processes and data to enable AI, you can get benefits from AI very quickly, but at the same time, you can be saying, how's this going to touch the whole organization? And going back to an earlier point that I made, the very fact that introducing AI isn't just going to change people's roles in taking over things that humans do, but also opening up those possibilities for new roles and expertise. Well, that will be a really interesting and useful insight to have at an early stage in the project, because then you can begin to look about some of the points you touched on, Brian. What skills are we going to require? Are we going to hire them? Are we going to develop them internally? What impact is it going to have on our organization design? All those sorts of things. And, you're not going to have to wait very long before you start to see a return on the first £100,000 or £50,000 or whatever it is that you've invested. And I think if we can make those chunks not just manageable but coherent, then we're significantly de-risking these kinds of projects and making them less scary from an executive point of view.
I guess, Tim, I mean, you've got my wheels turning here. I guess that also gives, you talked about making executives, making business owners a bit more relaxed about it. They have the option to opt out, don't they, at that point? If they say, well, this is enough, I'm happy with the gravel path.
Yeah, and the gravel path cost me X, and I'm getting a return that's greater than X. That's really, you're right. That's really the fundamental point about de-risking. But even if it turns out, because to be fair, in a lot of organizations, there's a bit of a tendency, for quite understandable reasons, to say we'll do AI because it's the in thing, and we may not necessarily know what we're going to achieve from it. So it may turn out that the strategic aspirations are not going to be fulfilled. But at least you can then stand back and say, all right, we spent X, but we've got X times 3 as a benefit from it, even if that's all we do. In most organizations, I don't think it'll be all that they do. But yeah, you're taking away a lot of the risk as a result of doing that.
That somehow makes it seem an awful lot less scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that, Tim. So, Andy, on the route to harnessing this power of AI, what steps should we take when it comes to data? You've outlined a number of stages that you go through with regard to sorting out data chaos, as I think you put it. So what steps should we take when it comes to data, especially if we take our own advice and go for a narrow and deep approach?
So, a narrow and deep strategy, I think, is hands down the best way to start with AI. It's because it delivers fast value, reduces risk, and builds capability with purpose, Brian. So, where would I begin? Here's some of my thoughts. Firstly, I'd choose a focused strategic use case, not fancy AI idea, but a business problem that creates value when solved. It's measurable, it's understood by the business, and has clear processes and data boundaries. When we choose well, the results will speak for themselves. As Tim mentioned earlier, right? We need to have something that we can measure. So define exactly what data is needed is next. We need to define our data. This is where the deep expertise matters. A recent MIT report stated that 95% of all AI projects fail. And they fail not because of the model, but because the data is incomplete, inconsistent, or misunderstood. So therefore, we need to identify the minimum viable data set, not everything the company has ever created. So then improve and govern that data set. And this is where momentum builds. You improve quality, lineage, controls, and accessibility for that specific domain. And the business sees results quickly. And suddenly the organization believes in the art of the possible. Importantly, though, data governance needs to be incremental. It's part of the overall solution to get to the next state, and it shouldn't be seen as one big investment. You then build the AI pipeline end to end. I mentioned the importance of data engineering, so I'll reiterate that now. Data engineering, feature engineering, modeling, deployment, monitoring, the whole life cycle. This becomes your blueprint or pattern for future AI projects. And then lastly, scale that up with confidence. So once you've delivered one successful AI initiative, the next becomes faster and the next becomes repeatable. You effectively create your AI operating model through real delivery, not just theoretical design. So, Brian, in other words, I think narrow and deep doesn't limit ambition, it accelerates it.
Okay, now that's again also reassuring. Actually, it's things that help us get our heads around this whole thing. Because otherwise, as we said right at the beginning, it's pretty daunting for business leaders to know where to invest and how to get on this particular train in a way that's not just going to be highly speculative. Back to your rather terrifying MIT study statistic. Tim, when it comes to business processes, what do you typically find when a business is looking to get better, faster, and more automated?
Well, usually they wish they weren't starting from here. But I think 2 points, and they both reiterate things that you said earlier, Brian, in particular, both of you, to a large extent. Invariably, when organizations start to examine how things really work, there's a lot that comes out that either wasn't known or that's been kind of quietly ignored in the past. Sort of thing you could get away with because people were doing manual workarounds, and just finding ways of getting around shortcomings in the systems. And that happens everywhere all the time. I can't think of any organization I've worked in that hasn't had that situation. And quite often, and this comes out a lot when you're interviewing people in a project, they're suffering a lot of negative stress that isn't particularly visible at a senior level because the swan's still gliding more or less gracefully across the water. And it's very easy, unless you confront the sort of challenge we're talking about here, to just let that stuff happen and let it run. And some organizations do for years and decades. And another example of that is one you touched on earlier, Brian, is if you've got an organization that there are lots and lots of these that haven't done a very good job of managing the integration of an acquisition or multiple acquisitions. So they've got lots of different ways of doing the same thing, whether it's processing invoices or producing management information, issuing dispatch instructions, whatever. And with belt and braces and some Excel spreadsheets and a lot of hard work and domain knowledge, they get it done. A few things will slip, but you get away with it. But when you start thinking about how you're going to automate it, then the environment becomes much more unforgiving and you just can't operate like that. So I think that's one of the big discoveries that a lot of organizations get. And then the second one, which again builds on one of the big themes of this conversation, because it's not just about how we do what we do today, only better. It's a stretch to get people to think about their processes and data in terms of what the assets at their disposal, things like AI and automation technologies, what those things make possible that wasn't possible before. That's a real stretch, but it's a necessary one. And for a lot of people, it's an exciting one. And what I often find when I'm interviewing is that there are lots of great ideas that folk are frustrated that they can't do anything about because of the constraints of the world as they know it. And certainly in terms of getting people's engagement, if they can see that those ideas are now going to have an audience and a mechanism for doing something with them, then that's a great way to get people on board and, as I say, engaged. And I think once you crack that, even though not every idea will be adopted and it won't always be plain sailing, you're well on the way to making good progress.
Okay, again, that sounds eminently sensible. So talk some more about how you then go about helping a business to get a proper handle on their business processes, and from there to reimagine, as you said, and re-engineer them.
Yeah, well, in brief, the 360 degrees model that we've looked at is a very good way to start, because ultimately the purpose of business processes is to enable the organization to execute its strategy, to close that strategy gap that I talked about earlier. So what are the strategic objectives? That's got to be the starting point for any piece of work like this. What do we need to be doing in the language of process and activity to achieve them? And that's a matter of interviewing and workshopping and bringing some ideas of external good practice to the table. And then what's the route to being able to operate in this way from how we work today, and therefore how do we work today? And then we use, shameless plug, AptumX's multi-dimensional business modeling software to capture all this and to ensure that the processes are designed and executed with what I call holistic integrity. And by that, I mean making sure, which our technology does, that all that we don't have those isolated islands that you both talked about earlier, that all the relationships on which a successful business model depends between not just between data and processes, but between human activities and roles, systems, yeah, data, of course, organization structure, all the components, all the things that can get a bit isolated in organizations, that all those relationships work and that no dependencies are broken. And our software won't allow broken dependencies. It won't let you move on unless you've addressed them. So you get an integral model of how the business works and how it is going to work in the future. And once you've got that, you've got something far more powerful than I found most organizations are used to, never have ever had historically. You've got a kind of multi-dimensional script of the world as it's going to be, and then everything really rolls out from there.
That's very, very, very interesting. I've seen that tool in action, and it's amazing, Tim. So we're coming towards the end of our session, guys. I really appreciated everything you've shared. I thought it might be just useful just to run back over a few of the key points. I think the first thing is that we started with the notion that everybody is looking at the potential of AI. People have implemented it in some way, shape, or form, but normally that implementation has centered around personal productivity tools, of which there are very, very many. Not exclusively. I mean, there are some people doing some amazing things at much more enterprise scale, but for most business leaders, the big question is, what can we get out of this? We talked about the fact that sometimes the implementations themselves can backfire, and I shared my pet peeve about chatbots. I think we also talked about the fact that, and most importantly, and one of the reasons when you referenced it, I brought the 360 slide back up, is these things have to work holistically. We talked about the absolute, it's more than conflation, it's the interdependency between business strategy, data strategy, and execution, and process reimagination, reengineering with AI and automation, and how they all inform each other. And you both very eloquently explained why, from your respective viewpoints, that was critical to success. I think we talked a bit about the fact that many people are kind of caught up with the notion that if I put AI in, I can get rid of people. And Tim, I think you very clearly made the point, which I 100% agree with, that it's the wrong place to start. When we think about capabilities, which is what we were talking about, an organization's capability needs will change and evolve. And it may be that there are certain aspects of things that people are doing or have been doing that can be picked up by technology. And that's been, as you said, a relentless kind of progression over hundreds of years, actually. But the things, the particularly human skills, are still very much required, and new ones are often birthed out of these sort of new ways of doing things and these new business models. We took each of these things in turn. We talked about the fact that we have to start with why. We have to start with a business strategy. Andy, you laid out your 4 points of approach with regard to data and getting a handle on data and which bits of data really matter. And Tim, to echo Monty Python, you gave us a great and convincing argument about why processes are not boring. So, I think we had a pretty wide-ranging discussion, but I think when we got into the practicalities of it, I hope that everybody listening to this conversation will have got the clear picture that it's all doable. It's a case of biting it off a piece at a time. It's about having a sensible approach to execution, that isn't just about shiny stuff. It's about, logically extending from your business strategy, examining the possibilities that new technologies give you. And in that sense, it's no different from days gone by. It's just that the power of the technology has moved on a generation. And I think a point you made, Tim, I think was that if you're using automation, then it's absolutely it's absolutely vital that both the data underpinning it is accurate and verifiable and governed, as you said, Andy, and also that the processes are well understood, because otherwise you end up with failure. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you would like to have a further conversation with any of us or any of the rest of the Atlantic Cedar team about what we've been discussing today, if you want just simply to just have a chat and get your head around some more of the aspects involved of translating business strategy into something that really makes ultimate competitive use of the latest technologies, or if you need any help in any way in this regard, please do get in touch. The easiest way to do it, the best way to do it, is to email us at info@atlanticcedar.com, simply because we can schedule a more convenient conversation all round with you after the fact. So as I said, we will be putting the recording of this conversation up on our website. We will be doing further webinars through the year, and we'll publicize the dates of those and the topics. We felt that this one was particularly urgent for us to have a sensible conversation around. So all that remains is for me to thank Tim and Andy. Your expertise is fantastic, and thank you for communicating so clearly. And thank you to everyone else who's dialed in to watch us chat away today. See you soon.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.